Saludos, bienvenidos, bienvenidas a New Kids on the Roll, lugar donde viajamos a otros mundos a través del rol y la imaginación. Y hoy, no viajaremos tan lejos quizás, en principio, solo hasta Venecia, donde vive y trabaja Francesco Nepitello. Hello, Francesco. Good
Hello.
morning.
Good
Thanks for being
morning.
here. El de hoy, como veréis, será un vídeo diferente a lo habitual en el canal, ya que tendremos una entrevista a un reputado autor de juegos de rol, no es un primerizo, como dice el nombre de nuestro canal. Y para saber algo más sobre su carrera, sobre cómo se convirtió en un profesional y por supuesto también para hablar de qué hay de nuevo en su próximo juego, que es la segunda edición, no es nuevo juego, pero es una segunda edición del Anillo Único. Porque todo el mundo es un new kid en algún momento de su vida. Así que pasaremos al inglés y vamos adelante. Well, Francesco, we'll begin, if you don't mind, with the moment when you were a new kid on the roll, when you started with your role-playing, with your professional career. How did it begin? So how did you become from a fan who maybe did his own fun stuff at home to a professional?
Well, I was lucky because I have two brothers, an older brother and a younger brother, and we always played together a lot. And we played games. We played board games, and we did our own games. Again, I was lucky because we have in my parents' house we have a small garden, and we were always out there. And we played with everything, with toy soldiers, with Lego, whatever, everything that people in the 70s used to and 80s used to play with. And my older brother had a very keen interest in designing games, in making games. So not with any idea of publishing or whatever, we're too young, but because we just liked to create our stuff and to create our rules. Also, there weren't that many games at the time. There were more, the usual stuff like Monopoly and Risk and stuff like that. So we invented our rules. And since our main interest was playing with toy soldiers, we were playing some sort of war games, doing our own rules. And so we were using, measurements and stuff. We weren't using dice because you didn't have many dice at the time. But that led in a very short time, that led us to look for published stuff. So we early on we found that there were actually rule books for three-dimensional war games. But in a very, very short time from that, we discovered that there was an Italian company that started publishing some incredibly good-looking board games. It was a company called International Team, and they debuted in the late 70s, and they were doing games like in the States were being published by companies like Avalon Hill and SPI, but the graphics had absolutely no comparison wherever in the world. The International Team games had fantastic covers. For marketing reasons, they had these huge boxes, very flat but very, very large, because they made them that way so they could have cardboard maps inside that didn't need to be folded. They were built like puzzles, but they had big pieces. So, and the marketing idea that was a very winning one was that the boxes were so big that you could not put them in the shelf in a shop. They had to be put on display in the window display because otherwise there was no other place to see them. And that's how I saw them. Passing by a shop in Venice, I saw these fantastic covers. One was for a game Yorktown. So you had some American Revolution type of ships shooting against the citadel. And then there was Iliad with Greek soldiers fighting. And another one was Okinawa, where you saw kamikaze fighters going towards battleships. And so we were immediately, struck dumb by that. And we started buying those and playing them. and I was, I think, about 10 or 11. I remember that because I was proud of the fact that I was younger than the minimum age indicated on the box. So I would say, yeah, I am playing something that is for bigger kids.
For adults.
Yes. And also, one element of the games that we created was that one of us was always playing something that we called the unforeseen events. So if we're playing something with toy soldiers or whatever, there was someone who's actually was the referee, but didn't simply adjudicate the results, but he was actually creating events. We played science fiction stuff, and fantasy wasn't that big at the time. So we had, for example, prehistorical. We had like tribes of prehistoric men, of course, with dinosaurs, even if they were not supposed to be at the same age.
Not canon.
And so we already had the concept of a game master, because we already had generally my bigger brother, that he was, of course, more capable of inventing stuff. So he was able already to introduce elements and make us enjoy the game even more. And I think I found my way when once I finally decided to be the guy doing the events on a science fiction game. And I played solo, basically, with me and my older brother. And he was absolutely struck by the fact that he enjoyed himself so much. And so I thought, I like this. I like this type of thing. And so it was very much a very natural step when, again, in a bookshop in Venice, I saw the cover of a small booklet that said, in this story, you are the hero. And it was the Warlock of the Firetop Mountain by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. And I had to buy that because I mean, the artwork was fantastic, and the text was so intriguing and captivating. And also on the catalogs of shops that we were buying games from, because we at that point we had started already to be in connection with shops that were specialized in war games to buy stuff from them. In the catalogs, they started having information about role-playing games. I remember an article also in a fanzine that was talking about Traveler and D&D, of course. So we knew something of role-playing games. We started to have our idea of what they were before even playing. And then it happened. And then we actually played when I got in secondary school, and I met Marco Maggi, my current co-designer. He was in my same class in the same school. And he also had an older brother. And his older brother bought D&D. It was the edition before the red box, the one with the Aero Lotus cover that we found at the time to be really horrible. we were spoiled by the graphics by International Team, who were really fantastic to this day. So yeah, we started to play with that, and I remember my first character was Arnold, a fighter who died in the first session because we were playing the of course the fact that he was called Arnold tells you that we already saw Conan.
Yeah.
So it was 1982, 1983, something like that. And yeah, we all died. It was a total party kill. Because we followed the evil cleric in the scenario that it was the Keep of the Borderlands. We followed the guy. Oh yeah, that's an interesting thing that is still valid as a consideration about role-playing games, because we were all killed by having followed this evil cleric to the gates of the Caves of Chaos, and he revealed himself to be evil, and with his followers, they attacked us. And of course, they were so much stronger than us. We were first level. They were maybe third level, something like that, and they killed us all. Okay, the next day, or maybe next week, we decided to play again. We created new characters and we started playing. The game master, who was Marco's brother, said, "Of course, you don't know anything of what the other characters knew because they are all dead." So he met us. He again presented us the evil cleric that is offering himself to lead us to the Caves of Chaos, and we said, Of course, no way, we're not following him. Oh, but you don't know that. You cannot You don't
Not metagame, no? No.
exactly. So we said, what do you want? Do you want us to be in a loop where we get killed all the time by the same guy? I don't remember how it went, but I think that we refused to follow the pattern. So yeah, we were hooked. It was a very quick progression in the course of probably 2 or 3 years. We started playing a lot of different games, and Marco started being the game master, and then I bought my first role-playing game as a GM, and was Villains and Vigilantes, superhero game by Fantasy Games Unlimited, and then I met my two main interests in role-playing games that were Call of Cthulhu, that I think I got in probably just 1 year after our first game. I think it was in 1983, because I have a 1981 edition of the box, and then in 1985 I bought Pendragon, and it was right after I was trying to play Chivalry and Sorcery with a big white box. It was super complicated compared to everything else, but I was spending a holiday in England during the summer for school, and I remember that I was going to the library to collect information, because I was trying to start up the region of Kent to play. And then when I came back, I found out that this game, Pendragon, had already a fantastic map of all the British Isles and everything. I said, why should I care to spend all this time to prepare this when I can play that? And I remember that incredibly, the shop that it was online, of course, the shop that by mail sold stuff, actually accepted me to trade to trade Chivalry and Sorcery for Pendragon. Now, of course, I would rather have kept that, because it was, of course, a very nice thing to still have that old edition of Chivalry and Sorcery. But I wasn't that affluent with money that I could keep all of them, so I had to choose. So yeah, that was the beginning. And we played. We continued playing. Because I don't think we ever stopped playing role-playing games ever since. Of course, there were a period when we played less. But you were asking actually about the transition from a gamer to a professional, and that happened 10 years after our first game, because again, thanks to our passion, because we were participating in the organization of D&D official Dungeons and Dragons tournaments in Italy. There was a national organization, so you had to play using certain parameters. And at the time, it was fantastic, because we had so many people applying. We had so many teams, and every year we had more. And so there was a moment where we were hosted at the Venice Casino. It's a fantastic place, and then we were there playing not only D&D at the time. I think we went already where we made a sort of a multi-system tournament, and the guys actually organizing the tournament were these people from Studio Jockey. Actually, at the time I had a different name. It was a company that was professionally dealing with games, because they were making games for newspapers, and so crosswords and puzzles and stuff like that. So and also board games, because they were organized around the figure of Alex Randolph. Alex Randolph was one of the most prolific game designers that there were, and we were lucky because he was American, but he lived in Venice for 30 years, very close to where I am now. By the way, he had a small studio, and so there were a number of people interested in game design that started to circle around him. So it was a sort of club based around a bar where they played backgammon and chess. And so when I started organizing with them the D&D tournaments, we actually got into this group. And since I was probably the one at the time that spoke the better English, at a certain point they asked me to go with them to the Nuremberg Game Fair in Germany, because they were going there every year to present game designs to companies to be published. And so I said, yes, of course. And I went with them, and I spent my first Nuremberg Game Fair, that is now, like 25, 27, or maybe 30 years ago, I don't remember. and almost 30. And I spent it there by presenting, I think, probably 10 or a dozen different designs to a lot of companies. I remember a lot of meetings. And by the time I finished it, I was so proficient in presenting them that I could, present again in a minute, something like that. So, and when we came back, we were asked. I was asked to be hired by them in the studio. And I asked them if instead of getting me full-time, they could get me and Marco both part-time. It was a combination of, I wanted to have Marco also in the business, and also I didn't want to be hired full-time. So they said yes, and we started working in the studio. We were there for a couple of years, and I think it was probably the best school we could ever had, because we were working side by side with Dario De Toffoli, who's now a very important journalist for games, and wrote a lot of books of games and poker and backgammon. And Leo Colovini. Leo Colovini is one of the most famous game designers in the world. He made too many games to mention. And Alex Randolph was there also. So we were able to learn from the best. And from that combination, after 2 years, me, Marco Maggi, Leo Colovini, and Dario De Toffoli designed Lex Arcana, our first role-playing game and our first published game. So my first game that went to print was actually a role-playing game. Because again, it was 1993 when it was published, but earlier than that, 1991, 1992, when we started working on it, it was very much a moment where role-playing games were growing in interest, and Studio Giochi got this contract with Dal Negro, that is a company that was very important in Italy, and it still is, because it's one of the main companies doing playing cards and chess sets and stuff like that. So they have a huge distribution network. They sell their games in tobacconist shops, just to make an example. It's something that you can find anywhere. And so they got this contract to do Lex Arcana. We worked on it. I think it was a very good job, because it had the different experiences. Mine and Marco as role players, Leo Colovini as already a veteran designer, and Dario De Toffoli, who was super expert in what a product needed to be. He said, I'm not a role player, so I want something that I can get, that I can understand. So I remember that we wrote so many drafts of every chapter, because he was always saying, that's not good enough, that's not clear enough. There is too much in here that needs you to be already proficient in a role-playing game. So yeah, still Lex Arcana was considered until recently, the best introduction to role-playing games. And in fact, in Italy, a good number of players started playing with Lex Arcana, because they could find it anywhere, almost more than D&D. D&D was published by Editrice Giochi, who was a mainstream company, so it was easy to be found. But Lex Arcana was there, so it was easily found. So a lot of people found it in unlikely places, like the tobacconist shop at the beach.
Uh-huh.
So maybe they were enjoying their summertime vacation, and they saw, what's this? Lex Arcana, by the way, is a historical fantasy role-playing game set in a Roman Empire that never fell because the magic exists. And by the way, coming full circle with this introduction, Lex Arcana came back to the gaming world last year with a Kickstarter after 25 years, and was published with a new luxurious new edition with lots of stuff. And now there's also a Kickstarter that is ongoing for 2 supplements, Dacia and Traccia and Italia, 2 geographical supplements for the game. So that was our start a long time ago, unfortunately.
So, and I guess at some point there, Tolkien came into your life, so to say, because as you said, Lex Arcana has become very well known after last year's successful Kickstarter, and the reviews have been very, very positive for it from the international gaming scene. But we have to admit, you are known especially for War of the Ring and for the One Ring. So how did everything start with Tolkien? For an Italian guy also, no?
Yeah, right. This started back in the early 2000s because by that time I was already coming often to Germany, to Essen Spiel and in Nuremberg every year because, right after Lex Arcana in 93, trading card games exploded. Magic the Gathering was invented, and that changed the whole scene of role-playing games, because where D&D before and role-playing games were your only access to fantasy gaming, basically, Magic became the way to get into fantasy gaming. There's no question, even if you consider it just a card game. Actually, it was the first exposition to fantasy that many people had, because it was hugely successful. And so for a long time, I don't know about Spain, but in Italy, for example, there was a big confusion. A lot of people referred to Magic the Gathering as a role-play game. So for a long time, everything else that was connected to fantasy was obscured by Magic. So sales of role-playing games entered probably the darkest period they ever had. Because the 90s, for a while, were a time where a lot of games came out. By the end of the 90s, role-playing games were in a very bad position. Not very good games came out, and not many games were actually selling. So in that period, me and Marco, we realized that we could make a living out of designing games, even if we always kept a secondary activity with a game shop. Because we started to have a game shop almost at the same time with, again, associating with Leo Colovini and Dario Toffoli from Studio Giochi. So we had these 2 parts that we said, let's better to have not all the eggs in the same basket. So game design and a real job. And so, but we realized that designing role-playing games was not a viable activity because we could not make enough money out of that. So we said we can design board games because we like board games also. In fact, the first game of ours that crossed the boundaries, that was published in an international market, was a board game, a dexterity game actually, that is called X-Bugs. And then later it was also called Micro Mutants. And it's a tiddlywink game. I don't know if you know the games where you push those plastic tokens and they jump. Mm-hmm. We created that game where you have stickers on them, and so you have different armies, and they have different rules, and you use dice to roll, and you see which pieces you can actually move. That game was quite successful in the beginning, and so we sold it to different companies in Germany and also in the US. It was published by Steve Jackson Games, by the way, and so that opened up a few ways, and we started collaborating with Roberto Di Meglio, who's a designer, but mainly at the time was a publisher with a game that now doesn't exist anymore. And so we started to go to conventions with him. We started to go to Gen Con, for example. Also because he was publishing a magazine that was called Chaos Magazine, that is still probably the most important magazine for role-playing games and board games that ever was in Italy. So with that excuse, we were going every year to the different game fairs and conventions to help him out and do things and discuss designs, because Xbox was published by his company. So once I remember that we were going to Nuremberg, probably because we were in a car and going to Essen. We started going by plane because it's very far from Venice. But Nuremberg, we always went by car. And we were talking, as we always do on our trips. And we started talking about games in the Lord of the Rings, because we were always fans of the Lord of the Rings. We were all of us were fans, and we all played some of the historical games about the subject. And one of these was War of the Ring by Richard Berg, and Marco in particular was a big fan of that game and played it a lot. I never liked it much because I hated the fact that the SPI games had paper maps. I was I was a snob from the point of view of the physical components. I was spoiled by the game, by Avalon Hill and International Team that were so good. And so the SPI game, I remember that Marco was that they had this huge map with strips of paper, because they were cut in like long strips. So to keep them from moving on the table, that he had weights on them. And I remember that I was saying that's cheap, but anyway. But I was in love with everything else about the game, because there were some fantastic illustrations by Tim Kirk with all the character types and the orcs. And so I didn't play it much, but I was watching a lot when Marco and another friend of us were playing it. So I knew the game well. So we were discussing that nobody did a good strategy game on the Lord of the Rings. And by the way, there were already the Peter Jackson movies. At least the first one already came out. Uh-huh. So and we were asking ourselves, how is it that nobody is doing a strategy game? Blah blah blah. And at the time, we were appreciating a lot card-driven games. We were playing a lot of card-driven games, the games where the main, war games had evolved from games where you had hundreds of small cardboard tokens, and you had to move them all every time it was your move, to games like the card-driven games where they limited your options to, for example, a hand of cards. You could only do things by playing a card every turn. Mm-hmm. So there was much better interaction between the players, because I play my card, I move my pieces, you do the same, and then it's my turn again, and so on. And so we were discussing how we liked this game that is called Paths of Glory. Yeah. It's a big game about the First World War. And we were saying that card-driven games were absolutely the way to go, because since The Lord of the Rings is at the same time a story about characters doing something, and at the same time is a military conflict. So card-driven games can handle both. So we were saying we could do this, but blah, blah, blah. And we spent a lot of hours by just talking about this. Then I think that in a later trip again to Germany, Roberto Di Meglio told us, after our discussions, I made a map for the game. And so when we got to Nuremberg, he showed it to us. So it was a big, paper map drawn by hand with colored stuff and stickers. And it was a region map. So it was divided in areas. So it was not a point-to-point map like the card-driven games. Yeah. And it wasn't even a hexagon map. So yeah, with that map, put on the bed in the hotel room, we started thinking, okay, that's nice. This is good, because the areas were already showing, were incorporating, if you want, the rules for movement, because regions that were harder to cross were smaller, regions that were easier to cross were bigger. So it was an interesting thing. Of course, that was the first map of 50 different versions of the map that we made. But yeah, we started to do that. And Roberto, with his company, had a connection with sophisticated games. Sophisticated games, or at least he had the address of the company.
Okay.
Sophisticated Games is the company that since years now has the rights to publish adventure games based on Tolkien's work. So he said, why shouldn't we make a pitch to the company, to Sophisticated Games, and see if we can do the game? Roberto already had the very wise idea of contacting John Howe, the artist, and basically already had this fact that John Howe was going to do the art for the game. And so he prepared the proposal, and based on the discussions that we had, we were started already having discussion on how to do the game. He sent a proposal, but we didn't have a game yet. We already had a number of ideas. Well, the surprise was that Robert Hyde from Sophisticated Games answered and said, okay, I'm interested in seeing your proposal. I will come to Italy next month, in a month from now, and you will show me the game. So Roberto called us and said, okay, we have a month to design a playable prototype. Of course, me and Marco, we're in Venice, that is in the northeast of Italy, and Roberto is in Tuscany, who's across the Apennines, across the mountains on the other side of the peninsula. It's not completely on the other side of the peninsula, but still. So we started, and there wasn't that much. It was not as easy as it is now to connect, like via Zoom or Skype or whatever. So we started collaborating at a distance, but of course, Roberto came to my house, and then we went to his house, and back and forth to design the game. So after 30 days, we actually had a playable prototype, but it was playable by us. I mean, we couldn't give it to you and play the game. We could just show it. So we had this meeting. In the meantime, Sophisticated Games told us that we were not the only ones to have proposed that. Surprise. and there were already some important heavyweights there, because the companies that proposed something were Fantasy Flight. Christian Petersen from Fantasy Flight was always a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings. So he proposed a game. Eagle Games was another one, and at the time it was a company doing huge games with fantastic looking maps. And then there was Phalanx Games, was a Dutch company at the time, but they had the original design by Richard Berg, the SPI game, in a new version, with illustrations by Franz Vohwinkel, who still is a very important illustrator in Germany for games. So we were saying, oops, we have some very tough competition there, and but we kept doing this, designing the game. We had this big map. We were playing with plastic tokens because we had so many of those chips from the Xbox game. Roberto had lots, and we had lots. So there were, like the plastic chips you use for playing poker. Yeah. So we had all the armies in the game that were yellow tokens for Isengard, the red tokens for Mordor, and the blue tokens for the Free Peoples, and so on. So we had these piles of tokens on the map. And when Robert came to visit us, we set up the game in a very small flat that was used by people working with the company for Roberto. And I remember that we didn't put up much of a show from the point of view of the company because he was there. He didn't want to play. He wanted to see us. And so we said, fine. And me and Marco played the game. And we actually ate takeout Thai food. So we didn't bring him to a fancy restaurant. We were just, we don't have much time because he was there. He was coming back in the same evening. So let's eat here. But me and Marco were playing, and we got so engrossed with the game because we were really enjoying it. So probably from the outside, the game looked really good because we were actually having fun. And then Robert came back and took his time to make his adjudication, because in the meantime, we didn't know at the time, but he went to Minnesota to Fantasy Flight to see their stuff. He went to Eagle Games, he saw the other games. But in the end, against all odds, Robert communicated that he decided to give us the prize to have us design the game for them. And we found out later that one of the good things was also that John Howe was with us, and he was good friend with John Howe already, so he appreciated the choice. And then also that the other companies didn't show him an actual game; they showed him the project, like a very nice painting of a Middle Earth by the designer for Eagle Games, and Fantasy Flight showed him a box. But they were very much more behind us. And also, I don't know, for some reasons, Robert had a hunch that we could do a good thing. And eventually, after, that was 2004, and it was 16 years ago, and 17 this year. And it's the game is still published, and it's still selling in the tens of thousands every year. So it's been hailed by many people as the best board game ever designed on the Lord of the Rings. Some people even say it's the best board game ever. So we're very happy with the result. We had 2 editions, many expansions. So of course, a success like that doesn't pass unnoticed. And so we were very much known for that, so for people able to translate the Lord of the Rings into gaming material, and that's why many years later, in 2010, probably even 2009, actually, no, even earlier than that, we got a first contact from somebody Olaf, because it was De Veer.
That's a nice story.
In the form of Joachim Dorca, who I met before in Nuremberg and Essen. We normally, in Nuremberg, we have this clique with this group of people that is all the Mediterranean guys. So the Italians, the Greek, and the Spanish. Or Catalan, maybe. and we go out to have dinner, and we didn't have much business actually to do between us, but it was just fun to be in their company. But Joachim called me in the morning one day, and I was in my house, and he said, "How about you design a role-playing game based on the Lord of the Rings? Because the license is free now, it's open, and nobody has it. For some reasons, Decipher dropped it, and nobody asked for it." And I was not really keen in doing it because, it was, I still played role-playing games, but I didn't design one since a long time. And I knew the amount of work that needs to go there, even more than for a board game as big as the War of the Ring. So I was really, I don't know, I'm not sure I want to do that, but I can get you someone to do it possibly, or maybe we can talk about how to do it and then have someone else write it. So I can be like the project manager and help you out with that. I have even a written proposal somewhere in my computer where I proposed them to go to Greg Stafford, the designer of King Arthur Pendragon, because I had recollections of some interview that I never was able to find out, where he was saying that Greg Stafford said that he would have loved to design a Lord of the Rings game. And I thought, I was a super fan of Pendragon and of his design, so I was, okay, yes, they asked me to do it, but I would love to play a game by Greg Stafford in the Lord of the Rings. So, but actually, for some reasons, they didn't want to do that. I think it had something to do with Middle-earth Enterprises that, I don't know, maybe had some previous experience with him or whatever. And so the idea didn't go anywhere. And luckily, because in the end I was, framed in the sense that they told me, okay, this is going to be you or it's not going to be. And then, and Robert Hyde from Sophisticated Games was very keen on doing it if I was doing it. So then, the story is a long one, but eventually De Veer dropped out of the project for some reasons. They decided not to follow it as a company. Of course, they always sympathized, and they still do, because they are the publishers for the Spanish language edition of every incarnation of the game. So, but we ended up with Cubicle 7 because Robert Hyde was a friend with Angus Abramson, who at the time was representing the company. So I remember a meeting in their offices in England where I met all of them, and also I discovered that the artist that I wanted to have in the game was actually a friend of them, because I was looking at these drawings by John Hodgson that I saw online for the game called Dragon Warriors, and I thought that this guy is good. This guy is really appropriate for the theme, so I would like to have him. And they said, "Oh, that's good because it's our friend and he's working with us already." Okay.
It all fits then. So.
Yeah. And so we started developing the game, and I worked for quite a long time. It was quite a stressful period because it's. I mean, I had my daughter at the time. She was born at the time. In fact, it was 2006 now. So the development was really long of the game. I started writing that, and in fact, I remember now that I used to say it was 3 years and a half to write it, because of course it was a daunting project for me to write a book in English and to write a game about the Lord of the Rings. So it's something that even if I did the War of the Ring already, it wasn't much, because also the role playing scene didn't know anything about me. So when word came out of that, there was quite a lot of skepticism around it. In fact, our first playtest program that we had when we had a draft of the game went really badly, even if the game was basically the same that was published later. Because there was quite a lot of reactions from people that were not expecting that, would have done things differently. There were a lot of designers in the beta testing program, and it's quite understandable. If you are a designer, you look at some prototype design, you always think things could have been done differently, and possibly that you could have done it better. So we had a lot of that in the beginning. But even if I was stressed, I was very very fixed on some of the elements that now constitute the basic components of the One Ring. For example, one of the things that I got a lot of flack for was the tight focus. I wanted to have a smaller region, a specific time frame, specific types of cultures there, because my point of view was always that Lord of the Rings role-playing games were basically unplayable because they tried to do too many things at the same time. And you could not have a book of 500 pages with cultures that went from the Bardings to the Haradrim, because if you do that, nobody will play the game and feel it's Middle Earth, because they will just pick things like that and put together a company of heroes that has nothing to do with each other, and so the focus would completely be lost. It was my experience with other games based on the Lord of the Rings. I never was a big fan of playing Middle Earth before I designed the game, because I felt that approach was wrong. So I tried to, of course, I took a lot of those ideas from previous games like King Arthur Pendragon. King Arthur Pendragon is exactly that, like that. You start small. All the core books for all editions of Pendragon got rid of all the options. You could only play knights in Salisbury. So one small place, one type of character. Then they usually expanded to have even knights from Europe, or even religious character and stuff like that. But the focused experience of the game was super tight. And so I thought that was the way to go, also for the Lord of the Rings to feel authentic. So even if I had quite a lot of negative impressions in the beginning, I thought, okay, but that's because they never played it differently and they can really see that's the way to go. And luckily, when eventually we published the game, everything clicked because the graphics by Paul Bourne and John Hodgson were spot on. Everyone liked that. Everyone felt it to be appropriate, and the design, of course, even if it was without its faults, was liked by almost everyone. We built a cult following, and we had a lot of people that were super devoted fans, like you, Valental.
That's right.
And have been with us since day one, and so yeah, I think we succeeded. I think that all the bets we placed on making the difficult choices were rewarded.
And not only the One Ring, but afterwards came Adventures in Middle-earth, led, I don't know if led, but the visible head is Jacob Rogers there, doing all the conversion, and it has also had a huge impact on the One Ring, I think. What has been your experience with this conversion to 5e?
It was not my idea in that case. I was afraid of diluting the fan base by going to, my concept in general is that if you have a strong theme, you should not use an existing system to do it, because something is going to feel wrong, because it's not built to fit. It's not a custom made system, so you have to make concessions in one way or another. So I was not very keen in doing that. But then at the time when the proposal came, we were quite a few years into the game line already. So I felt, okay, why not? And also we started thinking that possibly D&D and the One Ring and D&D and every other role-playing game have different markets. So the audience doesn't overlap much. People who play D&D don't play anything else, and people who used to play D&D rarely go back and play other games. So we thought by doing a 5e version, we are going to give people options, and we're going to reach people that would not play the One Ring anyway. So and we had this gap between the line published by the One Ring and Adventures in Middle-earth that made us feel that we were not stealing any player from the One Ring. So in the beginning, the creation of Adventures in Middle-earth had quite a torturous beginning, because there was an early design that was scrapped, and I'm glad that the final iteration, that one that came out, was much more connected to the One Ring than the previous one. I think I saw something of the first version of it, and I was critical of it, but then I didn't need to even protest any further, because because that was scrapped exactly because we didn't need to invent a new game. It was a matter of adapting the One Ring to 5e, and not to make a new 5e game based on Middle-earth. In that case, it would have been very much of a competitor to themselves, since it was the same company. So Adventures in Middle-earth came out as a direct port of the One Ring to 5e. Everything every design choice that is in the One Ring is in there, because you have the same cultures, you have the same focus, you have the same rules for the same main elements like combat, journeys, and encounters. So I was fine, because everything that was part of my original design was there. Of course, everything needed to be done differently because the rules were different. And in some ways, the 5e version is a more flexible type of thing. So I look at it as a sort of, the One Ring has been the purest choice, and the 5e version, the one that you use to play with more people, because you have, for example, friends that only play D&D. So the team was a big one. I mean, there was quite a number of people that worked there. Still, the game had like a very big percentage of text that was directly taken from the One Ring and put in there. because all the the descriptions, a lot of the abilities and stuff are directly transformed to their 5e counterparts. Jacob Rogers, I think he wasn't still already involved with the core books for Adventures in Middle Earth, but he was the official. He came on board as the guy that handled all the transpositions between the supplements for the One Ring and 5e. So he became the 5e in-house expert.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we took him with us also for this new edition. But that's something that is still in development, and we'll see. But yeah, I think it was a pretty good success, Adventures in Middle Earth. I think that it enjoyed from a couple of things. The fact that at the time 5e didn't have many options. Wizards of the Coast wasn't publishing much for the game, and we didn't have yet so many companies like now doing 5e version of things. So Adventures in Middle Earth was possibly the first ever alternate option for playing D&D, for playing 5e with something else. So it accomplished two things. It was the first time that Tolkien reached D&D, and that D&D was actually being ported over to a different background. I think that overall, both the One Ring and Adventures in Middle Earth, for some reasons, didn't reach the success they might have got. I'm saying this not to complain, because I'm very happy about how things were at the time, how it was selling, but it was a lot of work. We had lots of supplements out, but for some reasons, and that's why we're discussing also changing the name to the One Ring back at the time when we started talking about second edition, there seemed to be something that prevented the game to be perceived as a game on the Lord of the Rings.
Uh-huh.
And also Adventures in Middle Earth, that was quite a big success, but it's perceived to be much more than it was. I mean, there's people that says that Adventures in Middle Earth sold 10 times as much as the One Ring. Well, if they didn't cheat me on the numbers, then it's not, because I've seen the sales report. So Adventures in Middle Earth was selling much more than the One Ring, from the point of view that it was selling more in a shortest time.
Uh-huh.
But we didn't reach figures that were 10 times as much as so. And I remember that there was some consideration that distributors in the beginning were actually prospecting a bigger splash on the market from Adventures in Middle Earth. For some reasons, it was a success, but it was not as huge as it could have been. And that's possibly one of the considerations that led Free League today to go to Kickstarter, because Kickstarter is very much a hype making machine, even more than just to sell, to actually get the game to people is something that builds its own hype. So it's making people interested in it.
It's proven to be a good choice, a good decision.
Yes, in fact.
And regarding the second edition, because it was firstly planned by Cubicle 7, where did the decision to do a second edition come from? From Cubicle 7? From you? It was a
mix. We were discussing that since a while, because at the time the One Ring had quite a number of years under its belt already, and a number of supplements, and the game grew along its publishing history. So we added rules with supplements, and so eventually the game line wasn't as organic as it could have been, because so much was added after the fact, so to speak. And so we said that's a moment where we could probably take a pause and look what we have and see what we can do better, and change it and reboot it for a new audience, and also for the older fans. It's a moment where we can actually reflect on it, and so that's why we started to make some reasoning. Also, at the time, the company was changing a lot, so John Hudson was not working with them anymore, and so there was also a matter of having to mark a change from what the company was before, what was going to be, and so on. So these were some of the decisions behind it, and of course, that's it all became even more a necessity with Free League, because of course, changing company, I mean, there was no other way no other way forward than to start again.
Yeah, because the first thing we've seen from the Free League edition is the art, which is amazing, and also a big change. So I was a fan already. I'm already a fan for Symbaroum. So Martin Grip being there is for me a highlight. But it's not only a different artist; it's a different tone. It's more gritty, darker, it seems. And does it fit also a change in the, I don't know if I could say, the philosophy of the game, of the adventures you're going to
Yeah,
tell?
I think so. As you know, that the first edition was set in Wilderland and was set right after the Hobbit story. And very much of the tone that we were setting with the game was that there was a sort of a new prospect for optimism from the point of view. A place that was called Mirkwood was going to be again made less dark, possibly, and especially that all the trade routes and connections between the different people were going to be opened again. So dwarves were talking to elves, and then now the woodmen were enjoying a new prosperity, and the Bjornings were born basically as a people. And so this was in many ways given as this optimistical future for people to see. So the idea was, adventurers are people that are going out not because they have to, but because they want to see what's beyond the borders that for a long time were closed. Now with we moved the game over, along the timeline. So we're also, because we did that with the supplements for the One Ring first edition. So people that played the game have reached probably a certain date. They're not still into 946. That was the original starting date for the game. They're probably into the 60s of the Third Age. So what we did was, since we're advancing the timeline, we also moved the focus into a different area, because we don't want to. Well, there were many reasons. We don't want the old players to buy everything again. We don't want them to have again the same cultures, the same region described, and everything. So by moving the game to another place, and we chose the region to be Eriador, so to the west of the Misty Mountains instead to the east, we're going to provide that to a fresh start. Also, since then the year is to 965, it's later on, and we're much further into an age that is going fast towards a war. So there's more and more dark, foreboding things happening, because Sauron has declared himself in Mordor, and so people is not as optimistic as they were briefly, but that's the truth of it. So and Eriador also is a desolate region, mainly. So it's a place where the main characteristic is that once there was a great kingdom of men, and it's not there anymore, and they're all in ruins and stuff like that. But in the middle of it, we have the Shire, and we have dwarves, we have elves. So we have all the components, all the ingredients are there in a different thematic approach. So the idea is closer, if you want, to the typical D&D type of thing, meaning that you're going out to explore forgotten ruins and look for treasure and stuff like that. So more than being ambassadors of a new prosperity like it was in first edition. And I think that Martin Grip's art is absolutely perfect for that. It gives you that depth of landscape, you know, the greatness of relics of an ancient past, and the wide sweeping panoramas of mountains and plains. So I think it's really something that gives you that idea of adventuring in Eriador.
I don't want to go in depth with rules and changes, and so I know a lot of people would like to, but I think it's not for this interview. But I have to ask one thing that's maybe a personal question, and it's about the cultures that will be in the core book, because I think we've read that there will be elves and dwarves, but up to now, elves and dwarves was separated in the region of the hometowns. And we have, at least I haven't read anywhere, if those elves, if those dwarves will be from the Blue Mountains and from the Grey Heavens, or from somewhere else. So which will be the cultures in the core book?
Okay, let's start from the simpler ones. The simpler ones are the Men of Bree and the Hobbits. They are there because, of course, their land is straight in the middle of the playable area. And of course, as also it was seen by first edition, where we had hobbits anyway, even if they were very far away, but you can't really have a Lord of the Rings game without hobbits. So so the hobbits are there, and the Men of Bree also, and we have the Rangers, of course, and we also changed the way they're presented, so they're not considered a prestige culture anymore. They're just one like the others. And then we have the bardings to make for a sort of the exotic element in Eriador, like the hobbits in Wilderland. Also for the same reason, if we could have a hobbit in Wilderland that was going there because he was following the example of Bilbo, we can have bardings having followed dwarves to the Shire by bringing their stuff, because we know that also with the party for the birthday of Bilbo in the Lord of the Rings, they have Dalish toys and stuff. So there's absolutely the possibility that some bardings have followed the dwarves on their way to the Ered Luin or to the Shire. So also that is a bit of a change between how bardings were presented in first edition. Bardings in this edition are not the stay-at-home types. They are those bardings who left because they wanted to go abroad. So, and for what about the elves and dwarves? We took the chance to do one thing. In first edition, we had many alternate versions of the cultures, especially with the introduction of the adventurer's companion, and we made a very specific angle of characterizing everything from their origin. This is still true. So the elves in this edition of the game are the elves of Eriador. So they are not wood elves, they are not high elves. Now, the final decision exactly how to call them is open. So in the beginning we had elves of Lindon, for example, as a name. But going back to the books, as we always do, to when we have doubts about it, we go to the Lord of the Rings and see how Tolkien called them. They're just elves. I mean, the big difference is that they are not Sylvan elves, or they are not high elves. They are elves. Of course, the description of the culture in the book says that they mainly are from London, or and they can be found here and there, and so on. So you, as a Tolkien aficionado, Tolkien enthusiast, know, of course, which elves you are talking about. And so this allows us in the future to have wood elves and high elves. But so in some ways they are the vanilla elves, the default elves. Funnily enough, it's interesting because they are supposed to be the most prominent elves in Middle Earth by the time of the Third Age, but they are the ones that Tolkien talks about the least. You basically don't even meet one, because most of the elves that we know by name are either wood elves, or going into specifics, there might be Sindar, like Legolas, even if it's interesting that in the Lord of the Rings, Legolas calls himself a wood elf. He doesn't say I'm a Sindar elf or whatever. So, but in any way, from the point of view of how we develop the culture and their powers and everything is based on the idea that these are those elves there. Not then, of course, it gets very complicated if you really want to make a division, because the elves in Lindon are hard to know specifically who they were, because there were Cinder there, but most of them went away, and so it's even hard to say who's there in the Third Age, actually, how many, and so because Tolkien doesn't say much. So yeah, those are our generic elf, basically. But they are the elves of Eriador. That's the so I'm not sure we're going to call them that, to call them the elves of Eriador or some way, because I don't think we really need that, from the point of view that when we will do the elves of Mirkwood, they are the elves of Mirkwood or Sylvan elves, because also they are very close to the elves of Lorien. So I don't know if we will keep the regional connection to make that difference, or if we will go. I think we will also have less full-fledged variants. We will have more, but that's what we did already before. I mean, giving alternate cultural virtues and other specifications that make them different, but they will not be completely different from the basic elves. And the same goes for dwarves. Dwarves are the dwarves of Eriador, and so they may be, but that's more a decision from the player. If he can be, he's a dwarf of Erebor, because he can choose to be coming from Erebor rather than someone who stays in Erebluin. So we of course know that the vast majority of dwarves, if not all of them, that you can encounter at the time are dwarves of the House of Durin. So it's also hard for licensing issues to go there and eventually contemplate the possibility of having dwarves from different houses.
Yeah.
But we will see. For the moment, of course, the dwarves we have there are the dwarves of the House of Durin.
Okay, then to finish or to wrap up, I have two last questions, very quick. The first is, can you tell us anything, if there are any plans about BTT, so about support for Fantasy Grounds or Roll20, Foundry, or whatever? Is that a problem also with licensing? I think that sometimes there have been problems with digital gaming. It's not the same as pen and paper gaming and all that.
Oh, that's a very confusing matter, because of course VTT support has nothing to do with actual digital gaming. It's just giving tools to people to play online, especially this time of our life where we are all locked, or at least limited in movement. But it seems it's not an easy thing to explain and to make a difference, because possibly it can be abused. So for the moment, we don't have the possibility to provide that.
Okay.
And of course, this is not something that the company can give any support whatsoever, because it's going to be an infringement of the license until proven different. So for the moment, unfortunately, this is not something that we will see.
Okay. And then my last question is, what do you prefer, the female dwarfs with or without birds?
We could go on discussing for ages on that, because we will see, because right now we have a book coming out, The Nature of Middle Earth, that is going to be published this year at some point, and where there seems to be more unpublished considerations by Tolkien about many things. And maybe they will tell us the final truth about dwarves and female dwarves. Now, there was a discussion at the time, because some artwork came out at the time. Interestingly enough, there wasn't time to motivate that, because the description of the character, of the female character without the beard in the previous approach was actually in character, because we had the description, the biography of the character was that she was not allowing her beard to grow for a matter of honor connected to her father. So it was like she was shaving until she could prove her father was innocent, and so on. So of course it was also a way to avoid the tricky issue, because aesthetically it's not exactly something that is so nice to see. But I don't agree with the people that says that we have convincingly enough information to say that the female dwarves have a beard, because we have earlier versions of text written by Tolkien that says that. He actually says that female dwarves had beards, but for some reasons he changed his mind, and in the final published version of that passage he just says that female dwarves are so close to their male counterparts that other folks, not dwarves, other folks cannot tell them apart. If he meant that female dwarves had beards, he could have said that, since he already had a version of the text that said exactly that. So why did he excise that from the text? Why did he change the sentence to become ambiguous, when in a previous version it wasn't ambiguous at all? So my point is, either he was too afraid of going into such a strange thing that could be found not nice to see, or whatever, he didn't want to go there, so he didn't want to be explicit, or he changed his mind, and it's not that all female dwarves have beards. Because, there could be hundreds of reasons why they could be considered not distinguishable from their male counterparts. If you think about aboriginal tribes from the real world, especially in centuries past, when for the first time, for example, they have met with explorers from other cultures, or vice versa, when Europeans came to Japan, for example, I wouldn't be surprised that they could have mistaken a man for a woman, especially if he was long-haired without a beard, or vice versa. So, because, that archetypes, stereotypes are like that, where they say that we Europeans look all alike to people from the Far East. And so I think that could have been something like that simply an elf who doesn't care about the physiology of dwarves cannot tell them apart. There's a very, very nasty answer from, I think it was Galdor at the Council of Elrond, before the Council of Elrond, in the Hall of Fire, when Bilbo asks if they can tell which part of the poem is written by him and which one is written by Aragorn, And the elf answers that, how can I tell the difference? You're all alike. I mean, he said that sheeps can be recognized by the shepherd, but otherwise they're all alike. So he's even comparing hobbits and men to sheep. So, so I don't see how an elf could easily tell a female dwarf apart from a male. So I think the thing is still open, but some fans are very, very argumentative on that, and they won't take that as an answer. They will say, "No, Tolkien said they have a beard in a draft in his closet, but he said that." So, but we'll see. I haven't seen. I know that at this very moment, Alvaro Tapia, who's the artist that is doing all the black and white pieces and a lot of the cultural elements in the game, is locked. And I'm not. This is not a lie. This is true. He's locked in a cabin in the north of Sweden, in the snow. Working on the game and making drawings in the snow in the north of Sweden with, I don't know, -20, probably something like that. So we will see if he has chosen to have dwarves with beards or not.
Okay. The moment you include Lossoth in the cultures, you have to do a portrait of him. No? Okay. Thanks a lot, Francesco. We stepped over the time, but it was a pleasure for me, and I still have a lot of questions to ask. But I think you deserve also your free time on the weekend.
Thank you.
So thanks a lot, and just for the listeners to remember that the Kickstarter is still open, so you can still add more money in there because you deserve it. You and the whole team deserve it, really.
Thank you.
And
thank you very much.
We'll be updated by news, and we'll see what comes up.
Thank you very much.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye.